My parents chose my ex-husband in the divorce. Now they need my spare bedroom. I almost died when I picked up my ringing phone and heard, "Heather, sweetie, it's Mom," on the other line. I hadn't heard that voice in 6 years, not since she stood in my living room and told me I was throwing away a perfectly good man over drama while my rib was cracked and wrapped under my shirt. I didn't say anything for a solid 5 seconds because my brain was trying to process why this woman who picked my abuser over her own daughter was calling me sweetie, as if we'd just spoken last week. She kept talking because my mother has never been comfortable with silence, filling the air with, "I know it's been a while," and "Your father and I have been meaning to reach out," and I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, 6 years is definitely a while. That's one way to describe abandoning your child when she needed you most. I finally found my voice, and it came out flat and hard, nothing resembling the daughter who used to cry, begging them to believe her. "What do you want?" I asked, and she made this little wounded sound like I'd slapped her through the phone, completely ignoring the fact that she hadn't bothered to check if I was alive or dead since the divorce was finalized. "We're in a bit of a situation," she said, and I could hear my dad mumbling in the background, probably coaching her on what to say because that man has never had an original thought in his life, just opinions he borrowed from whoever seemed most confident at the time. "The house is gone, Heather. The bank took it. We've been staying in motels, but the money is running out and we just need somewhere to stay for a little while, just until we get back on our feet." She could have been asking for a cup of sugar with that tone, a perfectly casual request to the daughter she threw away. I laughed because she had said something so absurd, and my body genuinely didn't know how else to respond. "You're joking," I said, but I already knew she wasn't, because my mother doesn't have a sense of humor, never has. The woman thinks knock-knock jokes are the height of comedy. "We're family," she said, and that word landed heavy in my chest because family. Really? That's what we're calling this now? Family is what you have when people show up for you, when they believe you, when they don't look at their daughter's tear-streaked face and choose her abuser because he brought good wine to Thanksgiving once and always remembered to compliment her pot roast. "No," I said, and it came out so easy, easier than I thought it would. 6 years ago, I couldn't say no to anything, couldn't stand up for myself, couldn't even leave my ex-husband Conrad without apologizing for inconveniencing everyone with my trauma. But I'd spent 6 years in therapy learning that no is a complete sentence, that I don't owe explanations to people who never cared enough to ask questions. The silence on the other end was deafening, and I could practically see my mom's face, that pinched expression she gets when things don't go her way, lips pressed together so tight they almost disappear. "Excuse me?" she finally said, and there it was, the tone I grew up fearing, the one that meant I'd disappointed her, the one that used to make me scramble to fix whatever I'd done wrong just to make that voice go away. I said no. "You can't stay with me." My dad grabbed the phone then because I heard the fumbling and then his voice, deeper and more demanding, the voice of a man who's never been told no by a woman in his life. "Now listen here, Heather. I don't know what kind of grudge you're holding on to, but your mother and I are in real trouble. We're your parents. You don't just turn your back on family when they need you." The audacity of this man, honestly, the sheer audacity of standing there and lecturing me about turning my back on family when he looked me in the eyes and told me Conrad was a stand-up guy, and I was probably exaggerating because marriages take work, and every couple has problems. I remember exactly where I was standing when he said that, in their kitchen with my hands shaking so bad I had to put down my coffee cup, and he just kept eating his toast, completely unbothered by the fact that he'd just sided with the man who made me afraid to exist in my own home. "You turned your back on me first," I said, and my voice didn't shake, didn't crack, didn't give them anything to use against me. "You chose Conrad. You believed him over me. You watched me lose everything and you didn't care. So no, you don't get to come back now that you need something and pretend we're family." My mom was crying now. I could hear it. Those theatrical sobs she's so good at producing on command, the ones that used to make me feel guilty for having feelings of my own. "We made a mistake," she wailed. "We know that now. We're sorry. Please, Heather. We have nowhere else to go." And for just a second, just one tiny second, I felt something that might have been sympathy, or might have been the ghost of the daughter I used to be, the one who would have said yes just to make the crying stop. But then I remembered what it felt like to be completely alone, to rebuild my entire life from nothing while they hosted Conrad at Christmas dinner, and that feeling died as fast as it came. "That sounds like a you problem," I said. "Don't call this number again." I hung up before they could respond, and sat there in the silence of my apartment, the apartment I pay for with my own money, the life I built from the ashes of the one they helped burn down. My hands were steady, my heart was calm, and I knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't over. So my parents want to waltz back into my life after everything they put me through. They think I'm still the same girl who took their abuse quietly, but I've spent years learning how to protect myself and I'm not backing down this time. They want to guilt trip me? Fine. Let them try. Every call they make, every text they send, I'm saving. When they realize I'm not the pushover they remember, it's going to hit them hard. I can't wait to see their faces when they figure it out. I'll keep you posted. I was right. It wasn't over. I'd barely finished my morning coffee the next day when my phone started ringing again, and it didn't stop for the next 3 weeks. My parents have never understood the concept of boundaries, probably because they've never had to respect anyone else's in their entire lives. So of course they interpreted, "Don't call this number again," as "please blow up my phone at all hours until I cave." The first few days were just calls. Mom in the morning with her soft, wounded voice, Dad in the evening with his stern, disappointed tone, both of them leaving voicemails that ranged from guilt trips to barely concealed threats about what kind of daughter abandons her own parents in their time of need. I listened to exactly one of those voicemails, heard my mom say, "I don't know where we went wrong with you," and deleted every single one after that without pressing play. When the calls didn't work, the texts started. My mom has apparently discovered emojis in her old age because suddenly my phone was lighting up with messages full of crying faces and broken hearts and praying hands, accompanied by paragraphs about how she can't sleep at night knowing her daughter hates her. She actually used the word hates, which is rich coming from a woman who watched me fall apart and chose to believe the man breaking me instead. "We're running out of money," one text said. "The motel is making us pay by the week now," said another. "Your father's back is hurting from these cheap mattresses." As if I was supposed to feel sorry for them when I spent the first year after my divorce sleeping on a futon I found on the side of the road because I couldn't afford anything else. I didn't respond to any of them. Not a single one. I just watched my phone light up and kept living my life because I'd learned a long time ago that engaging only gives them ammunition. Then came the family members. My Aunt Dixie called me on a Tuesday afternoon, and I picked up because I actually like Dixie. Or I did until she opened her mouth and said, "Heather, honey, I just got off the phone with your mother and she is absolutely beside herself." I should have known. I should have known the second I saw her name on my screen that this wasn't a social call, that my parents had started recruiting reinforcements because their own attacks weren't landing. "She says you won't let them stay with you," Dixie continued, her voice dripping with that fake concern that runs in my family. "And I just can't understand why you'd be so cruel to your own parents when they're going through such a hard time." I had to take a deep breath before I responded because the old Heather would have crumbled, would have started explaining and justifying and apologizing for having the audacity to protect herself. But I'm not the old Heather anymore. "Did she tell you why we haven't spoken in 6 years?" I asked, and the silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. "Did she tell you about Conrad? About what he did to me? About how she and Dad chose him over their own daughter?" More silence. Then Dixie, sounding uncomfortable now, said, "Well, she mentioned there was some disagreement about your marriage, but I'm sure if you all just sat down and talked it through." I hung up on her too. After that it was my cousin, then my uncle, then my grandmother's sister who I haven't seen since I was 12, and who somehow got my number just to tell me I was breaking my mother's heart. Every single one of them had the same script. "Your parents are struggling. Family helps family. You need to let go of the past. Holding grudges is unhealthy." Not one of them asked me what actually happened. Not one of them wanted to hear my side. They just called to deliver my parents' message wrapped in the thin disguise of concern, and I stopped answering my phone altogether unless the number was already in my contacts. My parents had turned my entire extended family into their personal army, and every single soldier was armed with guilt and absolutely zero context. 2 weeks into this harassment campaign, I came home from work to find my mom sitting on the steps outside my apartment building. She looked smaller than I remembered, older, her hair grayer and her clothes wrinkled in a way that the mother I grew up with never would have allowed. For half a second, I felt something twist in my chest, some leftover reflex from childhood that wanted to run to her and fix whatever was wrong. Then she opened her mouth and said, "I knew you'd have to come home eventually," with this little triumphant smile, and whatever sympathy I'd felt evaporated instantly. "You need to leave," I said, and she stood up slowly, brushing off her pants like she had all the time in the world. "I just want to talk," she said, face to face, mother to daughter. "You owe me that much." I actually stopped walking and turned to look at her because the audacity of that statement deserved acknowledgement. "I don't owe you anything," I said, and my voice was steady even though my heart was pounding. "You lost the right to demand things from me when you chose Conrad over me, when you told me I was being dramatic, when you watched me lose everything and didn't lift a finger to help." Her face crumpled into that wounded expression she's perfected over 60-something years of getting her way, but I walked past her and into my building without looking back. She came back the next day, and the day after that, sometimes with my dad, sometimes alone, always with the same script about family and forgiveness and how they've changed. My dad tried the stern approach, standing outside my building with his arms crossed like he was waiting for a teenager who'd missed curfew. "This is ridiculous, Heather," he called out when he saw me walking up the street. "We're your parents. We raised you. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us?" I walked right past him without making eye contact, and he grabbed my arm, actually grabbed my arm to stop me, and I spun around so fast he let go like I'd burned him. "Touch me again and I'm calling the police," I said, and my voice didn't sound like my voice anymore. It sounded like someone who'd survived something and wasn't going to let anyone put her through it again. He stood there sputtering about respect and gratitude while I went inside and locked the door behind me. Then they found out where I worked. I still don't know how. Maybe one of the family members they'd recruited. Maybe they'd followed me one morning. But I walked into the office on a Thursday to find my mother in the lobby, chatting up the receptionist like they were old friends. "There she is," my mom said when she saw me, loud enough for everyone in a 30-foot radius to hear. "My beautiful daughter. I was just telling Sandy here how proud I am of everything you've accomplished." I could feel every eye in the lobby on me as I walked over, my face burning with a combination of rage and humiliation. "You need to leave," I said quietly, and my mom's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went hard. "I just wanted to see where you work," she said, still loud, still performing for the audience. Is that so wrong? A mother wanting to be part of her daughter's life? I leaned in close so only she could hear me. "If you don't leave right now, I'm calling security and having you escorted out. And then I'm getting a restraining order." The smile finally dropped. She looked at me with something that might have been shock, or might have been the first glimmer of understanding that I wasn't bluffing. Then she gathered her purse and walked out without another word, leaving me standing in my own lobby feeling like I'd just fought a battle that everyone around me didn't even know was happening. My hands were shaking when I got to my desk, but I didn't cry. I was done crying over people who didn't deserve my tears. I know what you're probably thinking. What could possibly be so bad that I'd let my own parents end up homeless rather than help them? What did Conrad actually do? And why can't I just forgive them and move on like everyone keeps telling me to? Trust me, I get it. From the outside, this probably looks cold. But you don't know what I went through. You don't know what they watched happen and chose to ignore. So let me tell you about my marriage. I met Conrad at my best friend's wedding. He was one of the groomsmen, tall and confident with this smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room when he looked at you. I was 24 and had just started my first real job after college, feeling like an adult for the first time in my life. And here was this man in a perfectly fitted suit who kept finding excuses to talk to me during the reception. "You look like you're planning your escape," he said, appearing next to me while I was hiding by the dessert table trying to avoid my friend's handsy uncle. "Is it that obvious?" I asked, and he laughed and said, "Only to someone who's also looking for the exit. I'm Conrad." He asked me to dance during a slow song, and when I stepped on his feet twice because I've never been graceful, he just laughed and said, "Good thing I wore my sturdy shoes." By the end of the night, he had my number, and I had this fluttery feeling in my chest that I mistook for the beginning of a love story. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I missed. All the red flags I painted green because I wanted so badly to believe that someone like him could want someone like me. The first 6 months were a dream. Conrad was attentive in a way no one had ever been before, texting me good morning every day, surprising me with flowers at work, remembering every little detail I mentioned and bringing it up later to show he'd been listening. When I told him I loved this obscure band from the 90s, he tracked down concert tickets for their reunion tour 3 states away and drove us there himself. When I mentioned missing my grandmother's cooking, he found her old recipe for apple pie in a box my mom had and made it for me from scratch, flour all over his kitchen, and this proud grin on his face when it actually turned out edible. "I can't believe you did this," I said, and he kissed my forehead and said, "I'd do anything to make you happy." He met my parents within the first 2 months and charmed them completely, bringing my mom flowers and talking to my dad about football for an hour like they'd known each other for years. "He's a keeper," my mom said after that first dinner, squeezing my hand with tears in her eyes like I'd finally done something right. My dad clapped Conrad on the shoulder and said, "You take care of my little girl." And Conrad looked him right in the eyes and said, "I promise you, sir, I will treat her like a queen." Everyone loved him. My friends loved him. My coworkers loved him. I loved him so much it scared me sometimes. This overwhelming feeling that I'd somehow won the lottery and was just waiting for someone to realize they'd made a mistake. The first time something felt off was about 8 months in. We were at a restaurant and I laughed at something the waiter said. Just a dumb joke about the daily special. Nothing flirtatious, nothing inappropriate. When the waiter walked away, Conrad got quiet. That kind of quiet that fills up the whole room. And he didn't speak to me for the rest of dinner. In the car on the way home, he finally said, "You really enjoyed that, didn't you?" I looked at him confused and said, "Enjoyed what?" His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Don't play dumb with me, Heather." The waiter. The way you laughed at his stupid joke. The way you lit up when he was talking to you. I tried to explain that I was just being polite, that it meant nothing, that I only had eyes for him. "I didn't mean anything by it," I said. He was just being friendly. Conrad shook his head slowly. "You have no idea how you come across, do you? How desperate you look throwing yourself at any man who gives you attention." I felt tears prick my eyes and said, "That's not fair. I wasn't throwing myself at anyone." And he pulled the car over so suddenly I gasped. He turned to look at me with this intense expression and said, I'm sorry. I just love you so much that the thought of anyone else making you smile drives me crazy. You're everything to me, Heather. The idea of losing you makes me insane." I told myself it was romantic. That jealousy was just passion in disguise. And I was lucky to have someone who cared that much. After that, the comments started coming more frequently. "You're not wearing that out, are you?" He'd say when I put on a dress I used to love. "That makeup makes you look cheap." He'd mention casually while I was getting ready. God, do you have to laugh like that? Everyone's staring at you. He'd say these things casually, almost like he was doing me a favor by pointing out my flaws, and I started changing myself piece by piece to avoid setting him off. Shorter hemlines became longer ones. Bold lipstick became neutral tones. I stopped laughing so loud, stopped talking so much, stopped being so much. My friends started asking why I never came out anymore, and I made excuses because the truth was, Conrad didn't like them. They're a bad influence, he said. They don't understand what we have. They're jealous of you, Heather. Can't you see that? They want to sabotage us. One by one, they stopped calling, and I told myself it was fine because I had Conrad, and he was all I needed. We got married after 2 years of dating. A beautiful ceremony that my parents paid for because Conrad said it was tradition. And who was I to argue with tradition? I walked down the aisle toward this man who I thought hung the moon, completely blind to the fact that I was walking into a cage. The first year of marriage was when the real Conrad started to emerge, like he'd been wearing a costume the whole time, and finally felt comfortable enough to take it off. The criticism that used to come occasionally became constant. This house is disgusting. What do you do all day? You call this dinner? My mother would never serve something this bland. Would it kill you to put some effort into your appearance? You used to try when we were dating. Nothing I did was right. He'd come home from work and I'd feel my whole body tense up, scanning his face to figure out what kind of night it was going to be. Good mood meant I could breathe. Bad mood meant I'd spend the next several hours trying to become invisible. The first time he hit me was over a casserole. I still remember exactly what it was. This chicken and rice dish I'd made 100 times before. Except this time I'd accidentally used the wrong kind of cheese. He took one bite, made a face, and said, "What the hell did you do to this?" I started apologizing immediately, the words tumbling out. "I'm sorry. I used the wrong cheese. I wasn't paying attention. I can make something else. It'll only take 20 minutes. He stood up so fast his chair fell over. 20 minutes? You want me to wait 20 more minutes because you can't follow a simple recipe? The back of his hand connected with my face before I even realized he'd moved. I stood there in my own kitchen with my cheek burning and my ears ringing, and he looked at me with this expression of pure disgust and said, "Look what you made me do. I didn't want to do that, Heather. You made me do that." Then he walked out, got in his car, and didn't come back until the next morning. When he did come back, he had flowers and tears in his eyes, and this whole speech prepared. "I've never done anything like that before," he said, his voice cracking. "Work has been so stressful and I just snapped. It'll never happen again. Please forgive me. I love you so much. I hate myself for hurting you." I believed him because I needed to believe him, because the alternative was admitting that my whole life had become a lie. It happened again 2 weeks later, and then a week after that. And then it became so regular that I stopped counting, stopped being surprised, stopped feeling much of anything at all. I learned to read his moods like weather patterns, learned which topics to avoid, learned how to make myself so small and quiet that maybe he'd forget I was there. I flinched when he raised his hand, even if he was just reaching for something on a shelf. I apologized for everything, constantly, compulsively. Sorry for existing, sorry for breathing, sorry for being the kind of wife who apparently deserved to be hit over cheese. The woman I used to be, the one who laughed too loud and wore bold lipstick and had opinions about things. She disappeared so gradually that I didn't even notice she was gone, until there was nothing left but this hollow shell who jumped at shadows and counted bruises in the bathroom mirror. I tried to tell my mom once, about a year into the marriage. I'd shown up at her house with a black eye that I'd covered with makeup, except the makeup wasn't covering it well enough, and she noticed. "What happened to your face?" she asked, tilting my chin toward the light. For one desperate moment, I thought this was it. This was my chance. Someone was finally going to see the truth and help me. "Conrad hit me," I said, and the words came out so quiet I wasn't sure she'd heard them. But she had. I know she had because her face did this thing, this complicated series of expressions that ended somewhere between discomfort and disbelief. "What did you do?" she asked, and my heart cracked right down the middle. Not, "Are you okay?" or "We need to get you out of there," but, "What did you do?" "Nothing," I said, my voice breaking. "Mom, I didn't do anything. He just gets angry sometimes and I don't know what sets him off and I'm scared." She patted my hand like I was a child throwing a tantrum over nothing. "Marriage is hard, sweetheart. You have to learn to manage his moods. Men are sensitive creatures. They need to feel respected in their own homes." "Mom, he hit me," I said again, like maybe she hadn't understood the first time. She sighed. "Heather, every couple has rough patches. Your father and I certainly did. You need to learn when to hold your tongue and when to give him space. Conrad is a good man. He provides for you. He comes to family dinners. Whatever's happening at home, I'm sure you two can work through it if you just try harder." I left her house that day feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my entire life. My dad was even worse. I never told him directly, but he saw a bruise on my arm once at a family dinner, finger-shaped marks that I'd failed to cover with my sleeve. And when I caught him looking, I saw him make a choice. He glanced at Conrad laughing with my mom in the kitchen. looked back at the bruises on his daughter's arm, and said, "Pass the potatoes, please." He chose to look away. He chose to keep eating and talking about the game last Sunday, and pretending that his daughter wasn't sitting across from him wearing evidence of abuse like jewelry. That's the moment I knew I was on my own. That's the moment I stopped hoping anyone would save me. Conrad knew exactly how to play my parents. He'd show up to family dinners with wine and compliments, the perfect son-in-law, so charming and attentive that my mom would literally gush about how lucky I was. "You really hit the jackpot with this one, Heather," she'd say, and Conrad would smile and say, "I'm the lucky one, trust me." He'd put his arm around me and squeeze just a little too hard, a reminder that he was in control even here, and I'd smile and play along because what else could I do? One time my mom made a comment about how I'd lost weight, said I was looking too thin, and Conrad jumped in with, "I keep telling her to eat more, but she's so dedicated to staying fit for me." And they all laughed like it was adorable instead of recognizing it for what it was. He was starving me. He controlled what I ate, when I ate, how much I ate, said I was getting soft and no one wanted a fat wife. But my parents just saw a devoted husband who cared about his wife's health. The night I finally left, he'd thrown me into a wall hard enough to crack one of my ribs. I don't even remember what started it. Probably something stupid, something meaningless, because it was always something stupid and meaningless. I felt my rib break, felt this horrible grinding sensation in my chest, and something in me broke too. Not physically, but spiritually. This final snap of whatever thread had been keeping me tethered to the life I'd built with him. I waited until he passed out drunk on the couch, packed one bag with shaking hands, and walked out the front door at 3 a.m. with nowhere to go and nothing to my name. I drove to my parents' house because even after everything, even after my mom's dismissal and my dad's deliberate blindness, some stupid part of me still believed they would help me when it really mattered. I stood on their porch at 4 a.m. crying so hard I could barely breathe, my ribs screaming with every sob. My mom opened the door in her bathrobe, squinting at me in confusion. "Heather? What on earth? It's 4 a.m. She looked past me at the empty driveway. "Where's Conrad? Does he know you're here?" "I left him," I said through my tears. "Mom, he threw me into a wall tonight. I think my rib is broken. I need help. Please. I need somewhere to stay." She sighed, this heavy, disappointed sigh that I'd heard 1,000 times growing up. "Heather, you can't just leave your husband in the middle of the night over a fight." "It wasn't a fight," I sobbed. "He hurt me. He's been hurting me for years, and I finally had to go. Please, Mom, please just let me in." My father appeared behind her, took one look at me standing there crying and injured, and said, "What's all this noise?" My mom turned to him and said, "Heather left Conrad over some argument. She wants to stay here." I lifted my shirt to show them my side, showed them the bruise already forming over my broken rib. "Look," I begged. "Look what he did to me." My mother looked at it for a long moment, then back at my face and said, "You've always been dramatic. Conrad loves you. Whatever happened, I'm sure you two can talk through it." "Your mother's right," my dad said, already turning to go back to bed. "Go home to your husband. Work it out like adults." Then my mom stepped back and closed the door. They actually closed the door in my face and left me standing on the porch with a broken rib and a broken heart, and nowhere in the world to go. I heard the deadbolt click into place. I heard my father's footsteps going back up the stairs. And I stood there in the dark understanding for the first time that I had never had parents who loved me. I had parents who loved the idea of me, the version of me that did what she was told, and didn't cause problems, and stayed married to the man who brought good wine to Thanksgiving. The real me, the broken, bleeding me who needed them most. That person didn't exist to them at all. Now you understand why I can't let them back in. They chose Conrad over me when I had nothing. They watched me lose everything and sided with my abuser. And now they need me? I've been preparing for the day they'd come crawling back. I just didn't know it would feel this satisfying. The next conversation we have, because trust me, they're not stopping. I'm laying everything out. Every choice they made. Every way they failed me. They wanted to talk? Fine. We're going to talk. I'll let you know how it goes. I didn't have to wait long for that conversation. 3 days after the lobby incident, my mom showed up at my apartment again, but this time something was different. She wasn't alone. My dad was with her, and they weren't wearing those entitled expressions I'd gotten used to seeing. They looked smaller somehow, defeated in a way I'd never seen before, standing outside my building like two people who'd finally run out of plays. I almost walked past them like I had every other time, but then my mom said something that stopped me cold. "We know about Kate," she said, and her voice cracked on the name. "Conrad's new girlfriend. She found us." I turned around slowly because I had no idea what she was talking about. Kate was a name I'd heard maybe once or twice through the grapevine. Some woman Conrad had started dating about a year after our divorce, but I'd made it a point to know as little about his life as possible. "What does that have to do with anything?" I asked, and my dad cleared his throat in that way he does when he's about to say something that costs him. "She showed us things," he said, and he couldn't meet my eyes. "Pictures, medical records, text messages, things Conrad sent her when he was drunk. bragging about what he used to do to you. My mom was crying now. Not the theatrical sobs I'd grown up with, but quiet tears that streamed down her face without any of the usual performance. We didn't know, she whispered. Heather, I swear to you, we didn't know how bad it was. I stood there on the sidewalk feeling like the ground had shifted under my feet, because this was not how I expected this conversation to go. I'd prepared for more guilt trips, more manipulation, more of the same tactics they'd been using for weeks. I had not prepared for them to actually admit they were wrong. You didn't know, I repeated, and my voice came out flat and hard. You didn't know when I showed up with a black eye and told you he hit me. You didn't know when I showed you the bruise over my broken rib. You didn't know when I begged you to let me in at 4 in the morning with nowhere else to go. My dad flinched like I'd slapped him. We thought you were exaggerating, he said, and at least he had the decency to sound ashamed. Conrad was always so charming, so put together, and you've always been... He trailed off, but I knew exactly what he was going to say. Dramatic, I finished for him. That's what Mom said when I showed her my broken rib. You've always been dramatic. Those were her exact words while I stood on your porch with nowhere to go. My mom made this small wounded sound and reached for me, but I stepped back before she could touch me. Don't, I said. You don't get to touch me. You lost that right when you closed the door in my face. Kate showed us everything, my mom said desperately, like the evidence somehow made up for what they'd done. She found us through Facebook, said she'd been looking for you but couldn't find you. She showed us pictures he kept on his phone like trophies. She showed us texts where he bragged about what he did to you, called you names I can't even repeat, laughed about how he had everyone fooled. I felt sick. I didn't know those pictures existed. The thought of my parents seeing those images, seeing me at my most broken, made my skin crawl. So a stranger had to show you proof, I said slowly, because your own daughter's word wasn't good enough. I told you. I showed you. I begged you to believe me. And you chose him. You chose a man you'd known for 2 years over the daughter you raised for 24. My dad stepped forward. We were wrong, he said, and those 3 words sounded like they physically hurt him. We were wrong about everything. About Conrad. About you. Kate showed us who he really was, and we realized we'd been defending a monster. You didn't just defend him, I said, and my voice was rising now. 6 years of rage finally finding an outlet. You hosted him at Christmas dinner while I ate ramen alone in a studio apartment. You sent him birthday cards while I was rebuilding my entire life from nothing. You chose him over and over again for years, and you never once stopped to wonder if maybe your daughter was telling the truth. My mom was sobbing openly now. We're sorry, she kept saying. We're so sorry. We didn't know. You didn't want to know, I shot back. I gave you every opportunity to see what was happening, and you chose not to look. Believing me would have meant admitting you made a mistake. It would have meant admitting you pushed me to marry him, that you paid for the wedding that trapped me, that you ignored every red flag because he made you feel like good parents. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents stood there looking like they'd been stripped of every defense they'd ever built. For the first time in my life, they had nothing to say. We know the truth now, my mom repeated weakly. We know what he did, and we're so sorry we didn't believe you. I laughed, and it wasn't a nice laugh. You're sorry now that you need something from me. You're sorry now that you're homeless and desperate. But where was your sorry 6 years ago? Where was your apology when I was sleeping on a futon I found on the side of the road? Where was your remorse when I was working 2 jobs while you were hosting my abuser for the holidays? My dad tried one more time. We can't change the past, he said, but we can try to make it right. Just give us a chance, Heather. Let us prove we've changed. I looked at him. This man who'd walked me down the aisle and handed me off to a man who would spend years breaking me into pieces. I looked at my mom, who'd taught me to ignore my own instincts because a woman's job was to keep the peace. I looked at both of them standing there with their desperate eyes, finally saying all the things I'd needed to hear 6 years ago, and I felt absolutely nothing. No, I said, and the word came out easy. You don't get a second chance. You had your chance. Every time I showed up with a bruise, every time I flinched at a loud noise, every time I made excuses for why I couldn't come to dinner, those were your chances. And you blew every single one. My mom reached for me again. Please, she begged. Heather, please. We're your parents. We love you. You love the idea of me, I said, stepping back. You love the version of me that does what she's told and doesn't cause problems and makes you look good at family gatherings. But the real me, the one who survived something you can't even imagine, the one who rebuilt her entire life without any help from anyone, that person is a stranger to you. And I'm going to keep it that way. I turned and walked into my building without looking back. I could hear my mom crying behind me, could hear my dad calling my name, but I didn't stop. I'd spent too many years stopping for people who didn't stop for me. The elevator doors closed and I finally let myself breathe. My hands were shaking, but my heart was steady. They'd finally admitted they were wrong. They'd finally apologized. And it didn't change a single thing. Some doors, once closed, are meant to stay that way. I should have known that wouldn't be the end of it. My parents have never been able to take no for an answer. And the next move they made? It pushed me to call the police. And this time, I wasn't the only one who saw it happen. Come back for the update. A week went by after that conversation, and I started to think maybe they'd finally gotten the message. I'd almost convinced myself they'd found somewhere else to go. Maybe crawled back to one of the relatives they'd weaponized against me. Maybe finally accepted that I wasn't going to cave. I was walking home from work when I turned onto my street and felt my whole body go cold. There was a light on in my apartment window. I stopped walking and just stared at it because I never left lights on. Ever. I'm obsessive about my electric bill. Have been ever since those first months after the divorce when every penny mattered and leaving a light on felt like burning money. My feet wouldn't move. I just stood there on the sidewalk trying to convince myself there was another explanation. A timer I'd forgotten about. A reflection from somewhere else. Anything except what I already knew in my gut was true. My neighbor Rita was outside watering her plants on the shared balcony. This sweet older woman who'd lived next door to me for 3 years and always asked how my day was going. She spotted me before I could move and her face told me everything. "Heather, honey," she said, and her voice was careful in a way that made my stomach twist. "There are people in your apartment. They said they were your parents. I saw them go in through your bedroom window about an hour ago. I wasn't sure if I should call someone." I thanked her, but the words came out hollow. I couldn't form real sentences, couldn't do anything except put one foot in front of the other, until I was standing outside my own front door hearing voices on the other side. My mother's laugh, my father's cough, the clinking of dishes, the smell of something cooking, the sound of my television playing some game show I never watched. I unlocked the door with shaking hands and stepped into a nightmare. They'd made themselves at home. That's the only way to describe it. My dad was stretched out on my couch, shoes off, feet up on my coffee table, a beer in his hand that I recognized from the six-pack I'd been saving in the back of my fridge. He was watching TV like he owned the place. My mom was in my kitchen stirring something on my stove, and when she heard the door open, she turned around with this smile on her face like I was a guest arriving at her house instead of the other way around. "There's my girl," my mom said, setting down the spoon. "I was just making us all some dinner. You really need to go grocery shopping, sweetheart. There's barely anything in here. I found some pasta and sauce in the back of the cabinet, though. It's almost ready. Perfect timing." I couldn't speak. I stood in my own doorway looking at these two people who had broken into my home and were acting like this was completely normal, like they hadn't committed an actual crime to be standing where they were standing. "How did you get in here?" My voice came out strangled and wrong. My dad didn't even look away from the TV. "Back window," he said casually, taking a sip of my beer. "You really should be more careful about locking up. Anyone could get in." "That window was locked. I check it every night." "Well, locks can be finicky," my mom said with a little shrug. Like breaking and entering was just a minor inconvenience we could all laugh about later. "We didn't have a choice, Heather. You wouldn't answer your door, you wouldn't take our calls. The motel wanted another week up front and we'd already spent everything. What were we supposed to do, sleep on the street?" "Yes," I said, and my voice was getting louder now. "Yes, that's exactly what you were supposed to do. Because this is my apartment. Mine. You don't live here. You weren't invited here. You broke into my home." My dad finally turned to look at me, and he had the audacity to look annoyed. "Christ, Heather, listen to yourself. We're your parents. This isn't breaking in. This is family looking out for each other. Get out." I said it quiet and hard, and I meant every syllable. "Right now. Get your shit and get out of my apartment." My mom turned off the stove burner and wiped her hands on a dish towel. My dish towel. Like she was the lady of the house being interrupted during meal prep. "Heather, please. We have nowhere else to go. We've been in that disgusting motel for weeks. Your father's back is destroyed. I haven't slept properly in days. We're your parents. You can't just throw us out on the street. Watch me." I pulled out my phone. "You have 60 seconds to leave before I call the police." My dad set down the beer and stood up slowly, and for a second I thought he was actually going to comply. Instead, he walked toward me with this expression on his face that I remembered from childhood, the one that meant I'd crossed a line and there would be consequences. "You would really do that?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "You would really call the cops on your own parents? Have us hauled off in handcuffs like we're some kind of criminals? You are criminals. You broke into my apartment. We're family." He said it like that word was supposed to mean something, like it was a magic spell that erased everything they'd done. "Family doesn't call the police on each other. Family figures it out." "We're not family," I said, and I started dialing. "We stopped being family when you chose my abuser over me, when you closed the door in my face, when you spent 6 years pretending I didn't exist. You don't get to show up now and play the family card like it's some kind of get-out-of-jail-free card." My mom rushed over and grabbed my arm. Actually grabbed my phone arm like she was going to stop me from calling. "Heather, please. Think about what you're doing. Think about how this looks. Your own parents, arrested, taken away by police, at your request. What will people say? What kind of daughter does that? I don't give a fuck what anyone thinks." I yanked my arm away and hit the call button. "You broke into my home and you're refusing to leave, and that's called trespassing." My mom started crying. those loud theatrical sobs she'd perfected over the years. This is unbelievable. After everything we did for you, we sacrificed everything raising you, gave you the best years of our lives, and you treat us like garbage. What did I do to deserve this? What did I ever do except love you? You want me to answer that? Because I've got 6 years of answers. But then the dispatcher answered, and I had to focus on explaining that there were intruders in my apartment who were refusing to leave. Yes, I knew who they were. Yes, they were my parents. No, they did not have permission to be here. No, I had not given them a key. They came in through the window. Please send someone. The next 20 minutes were the longest of my life. My parents made themselves comfortable again while we waited. My mom going back to stirring the pasta like nothing was happening. My dad channel surfing through my TV and commenting on what a shitty cable package I had. We raised you, he said at one point, not even looking at me. We fed you, clothed you, put a roof over your head for 18 years. This is the thanks we get. Having cops called on us like common criminals. You're not being arrested, I said, though I wished they were. You're being removed from my property. There's a difference. Same difference, my mom called from the kitchen. You're treating us like strangers who broke in to rob you when all we wanted was to be close to our daughter. Is that such a crime? Wanting to see our own child? I didn't answer because there was nothing left to say. The pasta water boiled over and my mom cursed under her breath, and I sat in my own living room feeling like an intruder in my own life. Then the knock came at the door. I opened it to find 2 police officers, a man and a woman, both looking tired in that way cops always look when they're dealing with a domestic situation. I explained everything as calmly as I could. My parents immediately switched into performance mode. My mom dabbed at her eyes and talked about how they just wanted to reconnect with their daughter after a silly misunderstanding that had kept us apart. My dad shook the male officer's hand and made a comment about how emotional women get, how this was all just a family squabble that had gotten blown out of proportion. I watched them work the room like they'd done at every family gathering for my entire life, watched the officers' faces soften as my parents transformed into these harmless, helpless old people who just wanted to be loved by their ungrateful daughter. The officers exchanged a look that made my stomach drop, and then the female officer said the words that made my blood run cold. Ma'am, since they're your parents and they've established presence in the residence, this is technically a civil matter. I stared at her. They broke in, through my window. They admitted it. I understand that. And if you want to press charges for the break-in itself, you can file a report. But as for removing them from the premises, since they're claiming to be invited guests, we can't forcibly remove them without a court order. They're lying. They literally just told me they broke in because I wouldn't let them stay here. How is that an invited guest? The male officer shifted uncomfortably. It becomes a he said, she said situation. Your parents are saying you told them they could stay, just not indefinitely, and that this is a disagreement about timeline. Your best course of action is to go through the formal eviction process. File the paperwork with the court, get a hearing date, and if the judge rules in your favor, then we can remove them. My father let out this quiet chuckle behind me, this smug, satisfied sound that made me want to throw something at his head. Looks like we're staying after all, he said, settling back into my couch and putting his feet up on my coffee table again. Family helps family, Heather. Guess you're stuck with us. The officers gave me some paperwork about filing for eviction and left, and I stood in my own living room feeling like the ground had opened up beneath my feet. My parents had broken into my home and there was nothing I could do about it. They were going to stay here, in my space, in my sanctuary, and the law couldn't help me. My mom was already back at the stove. Now, she said, like the past hour hadn't happened at all. Dinner's almost ready. Heather, do you have Parmesan? I looked everywhere, but I couldn't find any. You really do need to keep a better stocked kitchen. I walked out of my own apartment because I couldn't breathe in there anymore. Rita was still on the balcony. She'd watched the whole thing, the cops arriving and leaving, my parents staying put. I could tell by the look on her face that she'd heard enough through the walls to understand. Are you okay, honey? She asked, and there was real concern there, not the fake kind my family specialized in. No, I said, and my voice cracked for the first time all day. No, I'm really not. She put her hand on my arm, gentle and warm. I saw everything, she said quietly. I told the officers what I saw, but they said it didn't matter without proof of forced entry. But I know what I saw, Heather. And if you need a witness for court, I'll testify. I'll tell them exactly what kind of people your parents really are. I looked at this woman who'd been nothing more than a friendly neighbor for 3 years, who had no stake in my life or my problems, who was offering to help me simply because it was the right thing to do. I stood there trying to wrap my head around the fact that my parents had committed an actual crime, and somehow I was the one standing outside while they made pasta in my kitchen. But I hadn't lost. Just because the police took their side doesn't mean I'm trapped. I was going to call a lawyer and get the eviction paperwork filed. They wanted to force their way back into my life? Now they get to watch me legally remove them from it. I've never been more ready for anything. Stick around because this is the moment I've been waiting for. The next morning I was at the courthouse before it even opened, standing in line with a folder full of documents and a determination that surprised even me. I filed the formal eviction papers at 9 a.m., filled out every form in triplicate, paid the filing fee that I'd have to eat ramen for a week to recover from, and walked out of that building feeling like I'd just fired the first shot in a war I was finally ready to win. The clerk told me the hearing would be in 3 weeks, that my parents would be served with papers, that I needed to document everything between now and then. I told her I'd been documenting my whole life, and this was just more of the same. Living with them for those 3 weeks was its own special kind of hell. They'd taken over my apartment like they owned it. My dad permanently stationed on my couch complaining about everything from my water pressure to my thread count. My mom rearranging my kitchen cabinets because apparently I'd been storing things wrong my entire adult life. They ate my food, used my toiletries, ran up my electric bill, and acted like I was the unreasonable one for not being grateful they'd chosen to grace me with their presence. Every morning, I woke up to my mom making breakfast and saying things like, "I made extra for you," as if she was doing me a favor, instead of using my groceries in my kitchen in my apartment that she'd broken into. Every night, I came home to my dad asking what was for dinner like I was still 12 years old and responsible for keeping him fed. They tried everything to get me to drop the eviction. First came the guilt. My mom crying at the kitchen table about how she never thought her own daughter would throw her out on the street, how she couldn't sleep at night knowing I hated her this much, how she'd failed as a mother if this was how I turned out. I let her cry and kept documenting. Then came the anger. My dad cornering me in the hallway one night to tell me I was making the biggest mistake of my life, that family was all anyone had in this world, that I'd regret this when they were dead, and I was all alone with no one to blame but myself. I told him I'd been alone for 6 years, and I'd never been happier, and walked past him into my bedroom that now had a lock on it because I wasn't stupid. Then came the bargaining. My mom offered to do all the cooking and cleaning if I'd just let them stay a little longer, just until they got back on their feet, just until they figured out their next move. My dad said he'd get a job, said he'd pay me rent, said they'd be out within 6 months if I'd just give them a chance. I showed them the court date on my calendar and didn't say a word. They tried getting family members to call me again, tried having my aunt show up at my door to mediate, tried everything in their manipulation playbook that had worked on me for the first 24 years of my life. None of it landed anymore. I'd spent 6 years building armor they couldn't penetrate. The day before the hearing, my mom sat me down at my own kitchen table and tried one last time. She had tears in her eyes. Real ones, I think. And her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "Heather, please," she said, reaching for my hands. "I know we made mistakes. I know we failed you when you needed us most. But we're your parents. We're old. We have nothing. Is this really how you want things to end between us? With us on the street and you knowing you put us there?" I looked at her across the table. This woman who'd given birth to me and raised me and then thrown me away when I became inconvenient. And I felt something I hadn't expected. Not sympathy. Not guilt. Clarity. "You didn't fail me," I said, and my voice was steady. "Failing implies you tried. You didn't try. You chose. Every single time you chose. You chose Conrad's charm over my bruises. You chose your comfort over my safety. You chose to believe I was dramatic rather than believe your son-in-law was a monster. And when I showed up on your doorstep with a broken rib begging for help, you chose to close the door." My mom's face crumpled, but I wasn't done. "You want to know what I remember most about that night? It's not the pain in my chest or the fear or even the cold. It's the sound of the deadbolt. That click when you locked me out. I stood on your porch listening to Dad's footsteps going back upstairs while I had nowhere to go and no one to call. That's what I remember. That's what I see every time I look at you." She was crying hard now. Ugly crying. The kind she couldn't perform if she tried. "We didn't know," she sobbed. "We didn't understand how bad it was. You didn't want to know," I said. "That's worse. You saw what you wanted to see because the truth would have meant admitting you were wrong. And you've never been wrong about anything in your entire life, have you, Mom? Everything is always someone else's fault. I was too dramatic. I was too sensitive. I didn't try hard enough. 6 years of blaming me for my own abuse because the alternative was looking in the mirror." My dad appeared in the doorway, his face hard. "That's enough. You've made your point. No need to twist the knife." I stood up from the table. "I haven't even started twisting," I said. "Tomorrow a judge is going to hear everything. How you broke into my apartment through a window. How you've been living here against my will. How you spent 6 years supporting the man who beat me and then expected me to save you when you lost everything. Rita's going to testify about what she saw. I've got documentation of every text, every voicemail, every time you showed up at my work or my building trying to force your way back into my life. And when that judge tells you to get out, you're going to have to find somewhere else to go, because you're not my problem anymore." The hearing was at 10 a.m. in a small courtroom that smelled like old coffee and recycled air. My parents showed up in their nicest clothes, the ones they'd been carefully preserving for occasions exactly like this. And they smiled at the judge like they were at a church social instead of fighting to avoid homelessness. My lawyer presented everything: the break-in, the refusal to leave, the harassment campaign, the pattern of manipulation. Rita testified about what she'd seen, her voice steady and clear as she described watching my parents climb through my bedroom window and make themselves at home. My mom tried to interrupt twice and got shut down by the judge both times. When it was their turn to speak, my dad launched into this speech about family and forgiveness, and how children these days don't understand loyalty. He talked about everything they'd sacrificed to raise me, every dollar they'd spent, every opportunity they'd given up. He made it sound like I owed them my entire existence, and this eviction was the ultimate betrayal of everything they'd done for me. The judge listened without expression, then turned to me and asked if I had anything to add. I stood up and looked at my parents, really looked at them, and said the thing I'd been holding in for 6 years. Your Honor, these people had one job that every parent has. Protect your child. Keep them safe. Believe them when they tell you something is wrong. And they failed. They didn't just fail. They actively chose the other side. They chose my abuser. They defended him, supported him, welcomed him into their home while I was rebuilding my life from nothing. And now they want me to save them? I shook my head. I spent years feeling guilty for surviving without them. Years wondering if I was the problem, if I was being too hard, if I should just forgive and move on like everyone kept telling me to. But you know what I realized? Some people don't deserve forgiveness. Some people make choices so devastating, so complete in their betrayal, that forgiveness would be a lie I told myself to feel better. I don't forgive them. I'm never going to forgive them. And I need them out of my home so I can keep living the life I built without them. The judge ruled in my favor. 30 days to vacate, no exceptions, no extensions. My parents sat there in stunned silence as the reality sank in, as they realized for maybe the first time that I wasn't bluffing, wasn't going to cave, wasn't going to rescue them at the last second like they'd clearly been expecting. My mom turned to me with tears streaming down her face and said, "Where are we supposed to go?" I picked up my bag and looked at her one last time. "I don't know," I said, "but I know it's not my problem." I walked out of that courtroom and I didn't look back.